Okay.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky.
Hi. I'm trying to set up something so that I'll be a little louder. And I think this will work if yeah, we'll see. Okay.
Pay no attention to the woman in front of the sign.
Never mind.
moving right along, we are ready to look at the interesting and somewhat enigmatic story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. And just a reminder, one of the things that happens as we go through the first part of Genesis and really on into Exodus is an extended polemic against the false gods of the people around about Israel. The gods of Egypt, the gods of Mesopotamia, the gods of the Edomites and Moabites. And before pursuing that thought, perhaps we need Becky to explain to us what a polemic is.
It is a speech trying to convert somebody to a different way of thinking.
That's not bad. You can see her former background in English teaching is coming through. A polemic is an argument trying to persuade people to change their beliefs. And this polemic is against foreign gods. In this case, the gods of Babylon, although it has not yet become a great empire as it will later on in Old Testament history. It still is one of the cultures that Israel will encounter, and it has a number of gods that are worshipped. And in this case, the Tower of Babel has to do with those gods of Babylonia, Upper Mesopotamia. I'll read the first 4 verses of Genesis 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Excuse me. The land of Shinar, or Shinar, some people pronounce it, was where Babylon would later become a great empire. They make mud bricks and bake them in the sun, or perhaps in an oven to use as their building material. I remember being in Africa several times on teaching trips, and the buildings that we used for teaching and for staying in were made out of mud bricks that had been plastered over. One of the problems with that building material in Africa was that the termites would burrow through it and eat books and other things.
That's where the mud came from in the first place, from the big termite mound.
You're right. That's why the termites felt so at home, I guess. Well, the key to understanding this whole story is that these people wanted to make a name for themselves in verse 4. They wanted to build their reputation, and they wanted to show what they could do, perhaps with the help of the gods, although they didn't expect much help from gods in their culture. But anytime the people in the book of Genesis try to make a name for themselves, rather than depending on God, they get into trouble. Aren't we glad, Becky, that we're not like that?
It just occurred to me that many religious institutions name objective is to maintain themselves as an institution. They
Okay.
make a name, and that name has to be defined by certain parameters. And if anybody gets beyond those parameters, they're, pulled back into the fold, whatever, so that you got to maintain the name and the brand. You got to maintain the brand.
That's true not only of religious institutions, but of a lot of institutions, including political. Once they get going, they try to maintain themselves rather than do what they originally set out for. These people want to make a name for themselves and build a tower reaching into the heavens. They don't want to be scattered over the face of the whole earth, although that's what God told Noah and his sons to do. They want to be in charge. If I was inclined to preach, that would make a sermon. We want to run things ourselves. We want to be in charge of the show, and it causes problems. Well, verse 5, Becky, if you'll read 5 through 9, then we'll talk some more about this episode.
But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth.
All right. One of the differences between the true God, who's talked about here in Genesis, and the false gods, is that the gods of the nations depended on human beings to provide for them, that is, for the gods. According to the Babylonian creation story that we looked at previously, which goes on into the flood story, the gods had to have people to feed them, to provide them with food. And these people think that they can reach all the way up into the heavens where the gods are. But Moses kind of pokes a little fun at that by saying that Yahweh, the true God, has to come down from heaven even to see this city and the tower which they had built. He's so much greater than they are and than what they comprehend the gods to be. But he sees a danger that these people who continue to have one language and stay in one place can accomplish great things.
Is there something wrong with that?
Becky raises a question, and it goes along with one of the questions I raised last week. Is God afraid of something that's about to happen here? Does he feel threatened by this? Or what would be wrong with them staying in one place and carrying out great projects that they devise?
Well, for one thing, they don't acknowledge God, and they're not looking to do anything for his benefit. They're all looking out for themselves.
Right, I would say more they are depending on themselves and seeing what they can do in their own strength with their own wisdom and intelligence. And although most people back then and even today don't believe it, human beings get in trouble when we depend entirely upon ourselves to find our purpose in life.
But God says there isn't any limit to what they could achieve on their own.
I would explain that as being a hyperbolic language. How's your hyperbole?
Does God use hyperbole?
He does. Throughout the
Who
Bible,
knew?
Jesus indulged in hyperbole quite a bit. And in exaggerated images to make a point. For example, remember he said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's a bit of an absurd image.
Well, if this is hyperbole, then what does it actually mean?
It means what it says. Now, moving right along, I learned that in Sunday school a long time ago. Or as the rabbis used to say, I'm told, that belongs to the mystery of the 12, and the wise one will know it. What does it mean that nothing will be impossible to them? I think it means that they'll be able to accomplish things that they shouldn't be accomplishing. I don't know that nothing would be impossible. The human beings are capable of carrying out great projects. I was reading something online just a week or two ago about the building of the pyramids in ancient Egypt, and people are still trying to figure out how the Egyptians were able to do that without modern technology and so on. Well, they did it mainly with a lot of labor and understanding some architectural and principles of geology
In physics.
physics. Had physics back then, even before the Greeks. Yes, they did. Human beings can accomplish great things, but they're not always the right things for us to accomplish. And in this case, it would lead to them moving farther away from God. As I read it, they're going to go their own way. But God has a way of shaping things to turn out the way He has a plan for it.
So there are things that men should not try to do.
What do you think?
I think a lot of what we do ends up not being for the good of ourselves. We work against ourselves. But
I concur. I don't think it's necessarily that the project is something they shouldn't be doing, but the purpose is something that's bad for us to say. For example, we're capable as human beings of accomplishing great things through the use of science, but do those things always turn out for the benefit of humanity or the glory of God? I think, for example, of weapons of war. We were able to end World War II through the use of nuclear weapons, but I don't know if in the long run that has been a good thing for us to do. But in this case, God can see that it doesn't accomplish His purpose for the human race. He can scatter them throughout the earth, and ultimately, as we'll see beginning in chapter 12, to bless them through His purposes rather than theirs.
Is it possible that God still intervenes to prevent us from wiping ourselves off the planet?
You keep asking these difficult questions. You should give me a heads up on that so I can think real hard.
Yeah. Well, you pull them on me too, So.
That's how this whole project of ours got started, asking each other difficult questions. Of course it's possible. I think it's not only possible, but likely that God intervenes and shapes things, working them according to His purposes.
And He's not ready to end this whole world yet. But if He let us, we would end it shortly, I believe.
Wouldn't be surprised. Why is it that God is not ready to end the world yet? Do you think of any scriptures that talks about that?
Because He's not willing that any should perish, which is a very confusing scripture for me. We'll talk about it when we get there.
That may be somewhere far down the line, since it's one of the
Genesis.
New Testament epistles, but yes, God is not slow about His promises, for example, the return of Christ, but is patient, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to life. But that's all tied up in the mystery of free will and predestination, that He gives us a choice. And I think He knows when right choices will no longer be made. In fact, He's demonstrated that according to Peter in the same letter that he talked about God not being slow of keeping His promises. The Apostle Peter points out that the flood is an example of when God It had enough. But the world of that time had reached its limit. But he's waiting for something else to happen. And he's waiting for a man named Avram or Abraham to come along who will help carry out God's promises. By the way, we don't know what the Tower of Babel looked like, but we do have the so-called ziggurats, or pyramid-like structures, stepped pyramids from that part of the world, and it's probably something like that. In fact, I would venture to guess that if you go over there and visit that part of the world, you can find a local guide who will show you the remains of the very Tower of Babel. As guides are good at doing that sort of thing. Well, I'm ready to move on from the Tower of Babel, unless you have something else you want to bring up.
Nope.
First, a sip of tea. The rest of chapter 11 is another genealogy. It focuses in on one of Noah's sons named Shem, because his descendants will be the focus of the rest of the book of Genesis. Shem was 100 years old, and he had his firstborn, Arpachshad, 2 years after the flood. And it goes on to list the other descendants of Shem, all the way down to a couple of men that we're going to be interested in, beginning at verse 22 of chapter 11. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor. Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah. And Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Avram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, we have two Nahors here in verses 24 and 26. One of them the grandson of the other. It was quite common in ancient cultures to name a child after their grandfather. But the man we're interested in is Nahor's son Terah, who will be the father of Avram, as well as two other boys, Nahor and Haran. Becky, if you don't mind dealing with some of these words, I don't think the names are too difficult. Read 27 through 30, please.
This should be fun. Okay. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah and in his native land in Ur of the Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Ishkah. But Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
These people are living in a city called Ur of the Chaldeans, or Ur of the Chaldees. The Chaldeans were one of the tribes that eventually will result in the great empire of Babylon. We might try to raise the question just briefly, where was Ur of the Chaldeans, where Avram's family originated? There are two possibilities, and scholars are not agreed on which one. One of them is in the southern part of Mesopotamia, near the Persian Gulf, and the other is up of northern Mesopotamia, north of Nineveh. Doesn't really matter that much, except on how long a journey they had to make, Terah and his family, to get to where God is going to take them. But I'm guessing it was probably the northern Ur of the Chaldeans. But I hope it's not on the big final exam in the sky, because we can't be sure. But here's some things we can be sure of, beginning in verse 31 to the end of chapter 11. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go unto the land of Canaan. And when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. As far as we can tell from the records we have about Abraham and his ancestors, they were worshippers of a false god, a god called Sin, S-I-N, a moon goddess. It may be that some of his family were even priests of that cult. What I want to ask Abraham when I see him is, how did he come to learn about Yahweh, the true God, and why did he have such faith in him? The Bible doesn't fill us in on everything we would like to know about some of these characters. If it did, it might be somewhat like what the writer of the fourth gospel says. If everything Jesus did had been written down, I suppose the whole earth could not hold all the books. That, by the way, is hyperbolic language and exaggeration. But the faith of Abraham, later Abraham, is remarkable in many ways. One of them is somehow he comes to know about a God that none of his ancestors had worshipped, and he does what God tells him to do.
Well, one of his ancestors was Noah.
Way back there.
Yeah.
What about that?
Well, I don't know.
Are you implying perhaps that some of the knowledge about God was passed down through no other descendants? Could be, although most of it seems to have been lost by the time Abraham comes along. His ancestors had not seemed to have had much knowledge of Yahweh, of any. But God,
I think it was their mamas.
the mamas who don't even get their names in the Bible, you're voting for the influence of the mama. Okay, that will henceforth be known as Becky's mama theory. Yo mama? Somebody's mama. But notice what happens here as we begin chapter 12, and that will introduce us to next week's episode. Becky, please read chapter 12, the first 3 verses.
Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed."
All right, a powerful little passage, and one that will shape the future of humanity from that point forward. From our perspective, we're looking back about 4,000 years in history. Abraham seems to live about 2,000 years before Christ. We're a bit more than 2,000 years after Christ. But without this man obeying God, I don't know if God had a plan B. He doesn't seem to really need one. He seems to know what's going to happen, but he still tests Abraham's faith. But the first test is, leave your family and everything you've known, your culture, all the people you grew up with. I'm paraphrasing, expanding a bit. Leave all that and go to a place I'll tell you about later on.
TBA.
TBA. To be announced. It takes a great deal of faith for this man to do that. His faith doesn't ever seem to waver, although he has questions and tries to help God out at times. But he's willing to do what God tells him, and he heads out to a place that he knows nothing about. And he has the promise of a blessing from God that not only will he have many descendants, but all the nations of the earth will be blessed through his seed, his descendants. And on that note, we're going to stop for today. We're going to follow Abraham through about the next 5 chapters, or 6 chapters of Genesis, and see the trials that he and Sarai go through. Both of them have their names changed a bit by God later on. And Abraham, although he's promised all of this great blessing, dies without seeing the fulfillment of all the promises. He dies in faith. Well, that'll do for now, unless you want to say anything in addition.
Don't send money.
Yes, don't send money.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.